Hi, I'm Margaret McPherson, and I'm a research associate at the Centre for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children at Western University in London, Ontario. Today I'm going to talk about relationship violence and what everyone needs to know. This presentation is championed by Nelson Police Department and supported by the BC RCMP and the BC Society of Transition Houses. It's intended to teach neighbours, friends, and family members about relationship violence, how to recognize warning signs and indications of increasing risk, how to respond safely and effectively, and where to refer to find help in your community. The information is provided today from Neighbours, Friends and Families, a public education campaign sponsored by the Ontario government and managed by the Centre at Western since 2005. The research tells us that it is more than likely that in every room where Neighbours, Friends and Families is being presented, there are people who have been impacted by relationship violence, either directly or indirectly. The subject is difficult. It might be triggering, and so self-care is important. I will be showing videos, and I wanted to let you know that there is no physical violence in them, but the interactions between the characters may be challenging. If you're experiencing violence in your relationship, know that you are not alone and that there are people who can support you. Reach out. You have the right to be safe at work and at home. Join us in creating safer, respectful, and more supportive environments. Don't underestimate the power of your support. You can make a big difference in a person's life. There are universal practices that are trauma and violence informed. Act as if everyone you meet is dealing with trauma of some kind. You don't have to know their story to be supportive and caring. We take a bystander approach because we've learned from the evidence provided by death reviews that in many cases, it is the neighbours, friends, family members, and coworkers who are closest to the family who see the warning signs, but they don't know what to do with the information. To better understand intimate partner violence-related deaths and to identify prevention opportunities, a death review panel appointed under the BC Coroners Act was held in June 2016. The review panel was comprised of professionals with expertise in law, intimate partner violence, victim services, child welfare, Aboriginal health, public health education, and law enforcement. The panel reviewed cases over a period of 6 years from January 2010 to December 2015. During that time, 75 fatal intimate partner incidents occurred in BC, resulting in 100 deaths, with 73 victims and 27 perpetrators. The circumstances of the people who died were reviewed in aggregate. The review found that more victims were women, 78%, than men at 22%. Most victims were women ages 20 to 59. Almost 2/3 of all the victims had a known history of intimate partner violence in their relationships. Fewer than 1/3 had reported the violence to the police. Few of them had a protection order, 10. And 80% of the victims were killed in their own home. 3 areas were identified to reduce intimate partner violence deaths. They included awareness and education, collaborative safety planning and case management, data access, quality, and information sharing. These findings provided the basis for recommendations that were made by the panel to the BC Chief Coroner. You can find the report on the BC government website. Search for BC Coroner Service Death Review Panel, a review of intimate partner violence deaths, 2010 to 2015. So that gives you a little bit of a background and some of the lessons learned. Looking ahead, we want to teach everyone to recognize, respond, and refer, engaging people as bystanders to tap into the network of relationships to help keep people safe. Relationship violence is violence perpetrated against spouses and dating partners in a current or former relationship. It knows no boundaries in terms of gender or socioeconomic status. We are using the term relationship violence in this presentation to describe couples who are dating, same-sex or heterosexual relationships, married, separated, divorced, or common law. Different terms can be used. Domestic violence, intimate partner violence, that's the term that's used by the government of BC. Gender-based violence and violence in relationships, which is the term used by the RCMP. Whatever the term, relationships violence can happen to anyone from any background, anywhere in Canada. And people who use abusive behavior to control their partner will be found in every social group. Our focus for this presentation is on women because most often they are the victims of serious injury and death by their male partner or other male family member. This is not to say that men don't also experience violence in their relationships and need support. From the Femicide Observatory, we saw that in 2021 there were 173 women and girls killed in Canada. When the accused was identified, 133 of them, 89% of them, were male. The experience of violence is not uniform. Everyone has a unique social location that can create advantages and disadvantages based on identity and characteristics such as class, gender, race, ethnicity, ability, age, sexual orientation, and your geographical location. You can see the structural inequities of society by the stats of whole groups of people who experience higher rates of violence. These rates show us where society is failing and points to the places where intervention and investments in prevention need to occur. There are different forms of violence. There's emotional and psychological abuse where you have somebody insulting you, belittling. There's humiliation, threats to children, pets. Sexual violence is very common in relationship violence, and so sex acts without consent, threats of repercussions or refusing. Criminal harassment, also known as stalking, is the repeated and unwanted conduct that creates fear. Might be following, watching you, tracking you. Physical violence, of course, is the intentional or threatened use of physical force, including pushing, hitting, cutting, punching, slapping, shoving, and strangulation. Coercive control is when you see multiple forms of violence that form a pattern of violence that's repeated. That's what we call coercive control. And I'm going to talk about that more in a few minutes. It's a myth that if there is no physical violence, it's not serious or dangerous. Financial abuse is another type of abuse where one person is controlling or misusing the money and limiting maybe a partner's ability to access school or work. Spiritual abuse occurs when your beliefs are used to manipulate you or dominate or control, or you're not allowed to practice your faith. Reproductive control is controlling your choices, might be pregnancy, access to health services. The BC Society of Transition Houses describes technology-facilitated violence, also called cyber violence, as referring to a range of behaviors that use technology to facilitate harm. Technology-facilitated gender-based violence, a form of technology-facilitated violence, can include but is not limited to hacking, surveillance, tracking, impersonation, harassment, spamming, recruitment, malicious distribution, and denial of services. Technology enables stalking, harassment, monitoring, and degradation through messages, public embarrassment, as well as coercive demands for sexual content. It is increasingly being misused in relationships. Conflict is inevitable in relationships. Sometimes it is both people who are fighting with each other, going from fight to fight. Each may feel like the victim, blaming the other for their own behavior. Every situation of relationship violence causes harm and should be taken seriously. But let's talk about power dynamics. Every relationship has conflict. But does the couple share power, struggle for power, or is there one partner who is exerting power over the other, taking away their voice, their autonomy, their ability to act and to make choices? While all couples experience conflict, there is a difference in relational skills when it comes to resolving that conflict in healthy ways. Conflict that is escalated, unresolved, heightened, volatile, or ongoing is not healthy and can become patterned in a relationship, resulting in frequent bickering, arguments, one-upmanship, fighting, even physical confrontation. While power-struggling relationships may be unhealthy, they're not the same as abusive relationships, so they may be mistaken as such. Here is where it becomes really crucial to make assessments that differentiate between escalated conflict, where they're struggling for power, versus a pattern of abuse and control where one person is power over. Escalated conflict in relationships may need intervention, but if the only supports we have to offer must distinguish between an abuser and a victim, then we may well misidentify the dynamics in the relationship, label the parties involved as abuser and victim, and offer interventions that are irrelevant, inappropriate, and possibly damaging. The pattern of power over violence we are describing is also called coercive control. And increasingly, coercive control is recognized in Canadian policy and laws as the most dangerous form of relationship violence. It has been written into recent amendments to the Canadian Divorce Act. When one partner uses a pattern of abusive behavior to be in control of the relationship, it has also been described as intimate terrorism. Coercive control has the highest risk for injury and death and is most often perpetrated by men against their intimate partner. Victims often live in fear and will change their behavior to manage the ongoing threat of violence. Recognizing the violence as ongoing and occurring as a pattern is important because it makes it predictable and therefore preventable. It's like walking on eggshells. You have to be so careful all the time because the smallest thing can set the violence off. You're about to get a private look into the lives of Gail and Brian. Watch for what makes you feel uncomfortable. And a caution, there's no physical violence, but there is tension and abusive behavior in the scene.
You're late. Where were you?
I thought we both agreed I should take as much overtime as possible until he found something.
You couldn't call?
I didn't want to wake you.
You're my wife, Gail. Man has a right to know where his wife is, don't you think? When you're not where you say you're going to be, I worry.
What are you worried about? Did you come by the residence again?
I did. And guess who wasn't there?
I sometimes have to cover other shifts at other sites.
Mm-hmm.
We've been over this.
Who were you with?
No one. I was working.
But you must have been working with someone. Or maybe that guy, what's his name again?
Oh, come on. Seriously.
You know, you're not as clever as you think you are. What else have you been keeping from me?
Brian, I am not keeping anything from you.
Who are you going to Mexico with?
No one. I was going to tell you.
Do you think I'm stupid that I wouldn't find out?
No, of course not. No, I just... It's for my birthday, okay? I thought we both deserved to get away for a bit.
Oh, forget it.
I'm just so exhausted.
Well, don't you ever go behind my back again.
This is the power and control wheel. It helps us understand the dynamics of power and control that are used to create the conditions where the threat or exercise of sexual or physical violence are always present. Just a look can convey the threat. So we see it in the movie where Brian bangs the counter. It's a threat. He's intimidating Gail with his finger wag. He feels entitled. A man has a right to know where his wife is. He's verbally, emotionally abusive. You're not as smart as you think you are. And he's blaming her for his actions. He shows up at her work. He's blaming her for that. He cancels the trip to Mexico without any discussion. And he doesn't want her working with her male colleagues. Seen together, this is what creates the pattern of violence. These tactics on the power and control wheel are good illustrations of what we're talking about. We want everyone to be able to recognize the warning signs of controlling abusive behavior. And a warning sign doesn't automatically mean it's abuse. Rather, it's a warning sign, like a red flag to say, pay attention. Some examples include put-downs, dominating the conversation, making all of the decisions in the relationship, checking up on the partner, acting like a victim, isolating the person from their friends and family, acting superior and more important than others at home. The partner experiencing abuse may be apologetic and making excuses for the behavior, maybe becomes angry when asked about it, or is nervous talking when the partner is around. They might be covering up bruises or injuries. Maybe plans are changed at the last minute with some excuse. Results in changes in behavior such as being sad, lonely, withdrawn, afraid. Maybe they're using drugs or alcohol to cope. This is a list of the most common risk factors for lethality, identified through domestic homicide case reviews by death review committees. Studies in the Canadian Domestic Homicide Initiative. There's a history of domestic violence. Actual or pending separation. Obsessive behavior of the person who's causing the harm. Depression of the perpetrator. The level of violence is increasing. There are prior threats or attempts of suicide. There is a threat to kill. There's attempts to isolate the victim. And about half of the time, the victim has an intuitive sense of fear. The perpetrator might be unemployed. Those are the top, most common risk factors from the death reviews. The pie chart shows us that risk factors are almost always present, most often in combination. 70% of domestic homicides had 7 or more risk factors that were known prior to the homicide. It's very rare, only 1% of the time, that the murder happened without any warning. So let's talk about responding when you see the warning signs. Once you have recognized something that makes you feel concerned, it's a warning sign. How do you respond? You should know that isolation goes hand in hand with abusive relationships. As the abuse intensifies, so too does the isolation. People become more and more isolated, which increases the risk for serious harm and death. So our strategy is to reduce the isolation to increase safety. To reduce isolation, talk with the person that you are concerned about. This is Rhea. She's a friend and a coworker of Gail's. She's worried about Gail and her relationship with Brian. So let's watch and see what Rhea knows about the situation. Listen for the warning signs that she names.
All right. Listen, I'll be thinking about you while you're lying on the beach with a drink in your hand, and I'm stuck here in minus 15.
Oh, I forgot to tell you, that's not happening anymore.
What? Why? I know how much you were looking forward to it.
No, we canceled it, just for now.
What, that was your birthday trip?
Timing just wasn't right.
Oh, what? For who? For you? For Brian?
What's that supposed to mean?
I don't know. I see you working so hard, taking extra shifts to save money, making plans, and then all of a sudden, it's all off. I mean, I can't help but wonder if maybe it was Brian who called it off.
That's not what happened.
He's still reading your emails, isn't he? God, how can you stand it? Now, why don't you just say something?
You don't think I've tried?
Well, you know, obviously you haven't tried hard enough.
Oh, what am I supposed to say exactly, huh, Rhea? What am I supposed to say? What? You tell me, now that you're such an expert at relationships.
He's just, such an asshole about everything. I'm sorry, I had to say it. He's always turning on the charm, making everyone else think that he's such a great guy, and meanwhile, he's treating you like shit.
He's still my husband.
He doesn't even tell you when I call. I mean, if that's not possessive, I don't know what else is.
Oh my God, is that what this is all about? You're jealous. You're jealous because I have somebody who cares about me. And what do you have, huh? A bunch of legal fees and an empty house?
There he is. He's checking up on you.
I should go.
So what is the impact of Rhea's conversation? When I watch that scene, I think that Gail probably won't talk with her about it again. It looks to me like the door was closed. We can understand that Rhea is afraid for Gail. She can see those warning signs. She can see indications that things are getting worse. But she responds by wanting Gail to do something to make it stop. She doesn't understand abusive relationships, and in a sense, she's blaming Gail for allowing Brian to behave this way. This is very common, blaming her for what he is doing, and it's not right. Brian is responsible for his behavior, and Gail is doing her best to keep herself safe. She does need Rhea's support, but at the end of the scene, it's not hard to imagine that Gail's going to start to hide what's happening because she feels judged, blamed, and probably ashamed for being in the situation. Do you think this is what Rhea wanted? How else could she respond? What could she do differently? I can suggest a 3-step conversation framework that can help Rhea. See it. That's the first step. That's when you see something that makes you feel uncomfortable. You know something isn't quite right. Some people call it their spidey sense. Name it. It's putting the name to that feeling of concern, and it's using the warning sign. I saw, I heard something. Name that warning sign that you're aware of, and just the facts. Keep your judgment out of it. You can also name your concern. I'm worried about you. And then the third step is to check it. It's the step back. Think of see it and name it as 2 steps toward a situation, and now take a step back to check what is happening, to hand the power back to the other person about what's going to happen next, to ask questions. Remember that a warning sign doesn't mean that abuse is automatically happening, and she might not be ready to talk about it. It can take a long time for a story to come out. So you sync it, see it, name it, check it, not to solve the situation, not to fix it. You sync it to open the door for support. That's the goal, to open the door, to reduce the isolation, to be a support. Because one supportive person can make a huge difference to Gail. So let's give Rhea another chance.
Well, I just see you working so hard. Taking extra shifts to save money, making extra plans, making plans. And then all of a sudden, it's all off. And I can't help but wonder, maybe it was Brian who called it off.
That's not what happened.
So don't take it the wrong way. But I'm a little concerned about what's been going on between you and Brian lately. And with what I've seen and what you've been telling me, I think that you need to be careful. I'm just a phone call away. Anytime, day or night. Okay?
So what was the impact this time? Is the door open? Will Gail talk to Rhea at some point? I think it's possible, maybe even likely. Don't push. You have to manage your concern. If she doesn't want to talk about it, respect her choices. It's up to Gail how much she shares and what kind of support she wants. Take your cues from her. Leave the door open even if she doesn't want to talk about it. I'm here for you whenever you want to talk. As the situation changes, an open door on communication will increase safety. Think of it as a human being approach, one person to another. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to solve the problems of another person's life. Start from a place of your genuine concern. It is a powerful thing to say to someone you know who is alone and afraid. I'm worried about you. I care about you. Your safety is important to me. Don't underestimate the power of your support. It can make a huge difference. Gail and Rhea are also co-workers, so safety is a responsibility for employers too. Relationship violence also happens in the workplace, and women have been killed at work. In recent years, changes to the Canada Labour Code and occupational health and safety legislation has explicitly included relationship violence as a workplace hazard. Employers have a responsibility to protect workers from violence and harassment. The BC legislation under the Workers' Compensation Act references attempted or actual violence by a person other than a worker of any physical force, including threats or violent behavior that could cause injury. Our recommendation to employers is to take action when warning signs first appear. If you wait for physical violence, you're waiting too long to act. When relationship violence shows up at work, it is most often to come into view through abusive phone calls and texts, stalking, harassment, and the abusive partner coming into the workplace. These statistics are taken from the 2014 national study, Can Work Be Safe When Home Isn't? This video shows some examples.
But many of your coworkers have brought forth valid complaints about you not pulling your weight around here, and that is a problem.
Hey! What happened there?
Oh, I fell. Yeah, it was several calls, actually. He was pretty unhappy the last call. Angry, actually.
Your last on-board service evaluation isn't much better than the one before. You're still late for pre-flight briefings, if you show up at all. And there are issues with your uniform.
At work, relationship violence most often shows up as performance issues. You notice a good worker is suddenly having performance issues, frequently late, taking more time off. Maybe there's behavior changes and she seems anxious, nervous, or irritated. Maybe she's using alcohol or drugs to cope or has bruises that can't be explained. Maybe receiving upsetting phone calls or texts. And things like maybe having limited autonomy with no opportunity to interact with coworkers outside of work because she has to get home. Remember, a warning sign is a red flag. It doesn't automatically mean abuse. It just says pay attention. You can see it, name it, check it, sync it at work when you're concerned about a coworker. You see it. She's taking off a lot of time. She's missed a deadline. She doesn't seem herself. You can name it. I'm worried about you. You've been off a lot. You missed that deadline. Take that step back and check it. Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? Listen and respect her choice to talk or not. Do what you can to leave the door open for support. We've talked about recognizing warning signs and risk factors and how to respond using the sync it conversation. The final section is about referring to services and supports and how you can find help in your community. You don't have to be alone with your fears and concerns. It's hard to hold this kind of information, and so you can look for support for yourself. It's all about relationships. Tap into your local networks. Learn about the services. Be proactive. You can also do things like donate, volunteer your time at many organizations. Be part of the change that we want in creating safe, supportive, respectful communities. These are a few provincial and national numbers and links, starting with the 911 call for emergencies. You can also call the victim link at the 800 number. Shelter Safe will tell you where to find a shelter and services anywhere in Canada. The BC Society of Transition Houses has a directory showing services across the province. On those websites, you will find information about safety planning. And then WorkSafe BC has great resources for employers, including a toolkit. And finally, Neighbours, Friends and Families has a website with information about relationship violence that you've seen during this presentation. The iHeal is a Canadian app that's backed by years of research and testing. It's free, private, and secure. The iHeal app helps women who have experienced abuse from a current or past partner to find personalized ways to stay safe and to be well. Finally, you don't have to be a hero. You don't have to fix the situation. Little things you do can make a big difference. If everyone has a role to play, then I hope you have learned something about the role that you can play as a neighbor, friend, coworker, or family member. Take the warning signs seriously. Thank you so much for taking this time today to watch this presentation. I hope you have found it useful.